all engineers need cross-functional or transverse skills to go beyond that junior individual contributor level, okay? So whether it's to progress in tech leadership or to move across to management, there's no way to say, hey, I don't want to work on like how I interact with humans, so I'm going to go into tech leadership. And today, we are, however, still in a system that rewards people who have great technical skills, but not great soft skills. Thanks everyone for welcoming me here. If I've understood the badge system correctly, I guess this means I'm a scaled CTO, so it's lovely to be amongst my peers. For those of you who don't know me, I'm actually the head of people at Sqreen, which means, yes, I do recruitment, I also do HR, but actually a lot of the time I do something pretty similar to what CTOs and technical leaders do, which is essentially try and build organizations and systems that can scale and won't break. And the comparison I always use is, you know, when you're architecting a backend, you don't have to worry about the secret agendas that, you know, your AWS instance might have, whereas with people, they bring a lot more complexity to the table. I'm Australian, as you can perhaps tell, or not. I'm not sure how good your ears are, but I've been in France for 8 years, so I do speak French. So feel free to speak to me in either of those languages, and I'm learning Spanish, fun fact. Sqreen, some of you have heard of Sqreen. Is anyone here a customer of Sqreen? Yes, exactly. So chat with Benoit afterwards if you want to find out how Sqreen can help earlier stage startups. Okay, so Sqreen, who here has heard of New Relic? A few? Datadog? Yeah, a few more? Okay. Essentially, the APM world really sort of took off about 8 years ago with companies like New Relic and Datadog, and Sqreen is essentially Datadog or New Relic, but for security, okay? So we do web application security. We have a micro agent running inside your application that's gonna send security information to our backend that's gonna show up in your dashboard. Very easy to use, ASM. So Sqreen, in a couple of words, founded in France, two co-founders who worked together at Apple for a long time, leading the Red team. So all the attacks, early attacks on the iPhone and things like that, that was them. And when I joined them a year and a half ago, there was 12 of us. Almost everybody was an engineer, except for yours truly, all sitting around one small room in Paris. Today there's 56 of us. We have a bigger office in Paris and an office in San Francisco. And in the early days, there was only the CTO and the CEO, who's also an engineer by trade. And for a brief moment, I actually managed our engineers for about a 3-month period, which is a strange move, I agree. But essentially, while we were waiting for our director of engineering to join. So I spent a lot of time with engineers. I find them fascinating. People often say, Alison, you're the head of people, you must love people, and I say it's not true. I don't like people very much at all, but I do find them fascinating, and the way that things work, and I find in particular engineers and engineering organizations fascinating, which is all of that to say why I'm here. A little bit of a context. So I gave you all a few options for topics that I could talk about, because I find often you come to these events and, you know, I've been given a brief and then I talk about something that you actually don't care about. So I've tried to cover a bunch of those topics, and I'm also around after for the people session. So feel free to ask me other things. One thing that I found quite strange when I arrived in France is that everybody wanted to be a manager, which where I come from is kind of a crap job. Like people who've been managers know that you end up actually just dealing with all the problems and all the people problems, and you don't usually get to do any of the fun stuff for why you got into the job in the first place. So I was a bit confused. I was like, oh, okay, I'm just meeting a lot of people who want to be managers. And then I realized it might actually be a France thing as opposed to an individual people thing. And what I sort of discovered over the last 8 years was, you know, there's a lot of messaging that comes out of business school and comes out of engineering school and then is reinforced when you get into companies, which is you're either a manager or you're not good enough to be a manager. And that's really harmful, I think, particularly in engineering organizations. And we have a lot of examples of startups in Paris where the CTO or the VP of engineering is sort of promoted from, if they're not a co-founder, they're promoted from within. And you've got people kind of on LinkedIn who's like, yeah, VP of engineering here, and you're like, otherwise known as a junior web dev, and like elsewhere, and it's just a little bit of this dichotomy, which is, you know, management is the holy grail. Americans and Australians, we tend to know that the manager is like, if you can rise as high as possible within an organization without having a direct report, like that's how you game the system. And we've kind of understood this. I feel like France is like catching up, and I feel like the engineering orgs are kind of leading the way, saying it's a path, it's not the only path. I find there's a lot of FOMO, or the fear of missing out, that happens with people who, aspiring, engineers who are wanting to be more senior and maybe, hoping to get into leadership roles. And they'll kind of, what happens at Sqreen, we have a weekly Paris leadership team meeting. Okay, so it's myself, it's our CTO, it's our director of engineering, it's our head of product. This is probably the worst meeting on my agenda, and we still haven't figured out how to make it useful. So it's half an hour, we get in the room and we go, oh, what have I maybe talked to you about, but not the other three, and who knows what, and we just connect, and it's really not a very good use of half hour. We're working on it. What I found out was that there was a whole lot of people in the Paris office who had, started a lot of rumors about what actually went on in that room and the decisions we were making. And we kind of went, oh, you're welcome to attend this meeting anytime. It's actually not a great meeting. Nothing interesting happens here. And I find there's a lot of this FOMO, which is if you're not in the room, you feel like that's where you need to be. You need to be in that room. And when you are in the room, the only thing you want is out, right? You're like, how do I leave earlier? So I think there's a bit of context in France that's useful. And I think even the way we pay people, in France, if you look at almost anybody's salary grids, it's essentially you hit a ceiling at some point if you're not a manager. And that's really reinforcing. We can say there are two paths, you don't have to be a manager, but if at the end of the day your system pushes you in one direction, well, you don't really have a choice. The terminology individual contributor is something that I think is getting more common in France. I think it's not a perfect name because it kind of evokes the idea of like someone sitting in a corner like doing their own thing and not talking to anyone. It's probably just the wrong word for saying no direct reports. I believe there are really at least two paths for engineers. I wouldn't say only two. There's definitely a management track, and we know quite a bit about that. What we're not great at yet is preparing people for it, but we know what it looks like. And then we have something more on the technical leadership side as opposed to people leadership. I do think there are other options. I think there's a lot more transverse skills. At Sqreen, we have one of our core agent engineers who is looking to make a career transition into solution engineering and be customer facing. So I think there's we have engineers who've moved across into DevRel. There's a lot of different paths, and I think we just need to sort of understand and reward those different ones without being too dogmatic, right, about things. I don't think you're either a manager or you're something else, and I think a lot of people who've gone through a few phases of their careers, you might have been a manager at some point and said, actually, I'm going to go back and go deeply technical. And I think particularly for CTOs, there can be this thing where, okay, we scaled and now I'm so far from the tech that actually in my next adventure, what I want to do is go back and be really hands-on and those cycles. And I think that's all pretty contextual. Who here knows what a career ladder is? Yeah, vaguely familiar? Okay. For the rest of you, essentially what it is a highly detailed document where we sort people into boxes, which is quite appealing to French people because we like to know where people fall, like which engineering school you might have gone to and where that ranks and all sorts of things. It's a neat thing as well because we go, it's logical, it's rational. And the idea would be you'd say, okay, here's your level 1, here's a description of somebody who fits into level 1, and here's what you have to do to get to level 2, okay, more or less. Who here thinks that's a good idea? There are no wrong answers, okay, a good idea, okay. Who here thinks it's a bad idea? Who hasn't had time to form an opinion because you just learned what it was? Yeah, okay, a few, perfect. Personally, I'm quite opinionated about job ladders, and Hugo knows this because we've worked together before. I think often the problem we're trying to solve with a job ladder is a lack of visibility about the next step. Okay, you have a big team full of engineers. They're saying, hey, I want to grow my career. The default, because we're in France, is to say, well, I want to be a manager, but then you end up with 30 managers and no one writing code, and that's a bit problematic. And so essentially, it's supposed to be a response to this problem, which is we want visible, rational, clear steps that are objective so that people can be inspired to go to the next step. It sounds really good on paper, like I'm bought in, right? It's supposed to demystify, democratize the promotion process. I've not personally to date met somebody who put one in place and afterwards was like, wow, that was a great thing to do. Like it solved all these problems. What I've tended to hear has been, we thought it would solve that problem, but actually in reality, what we used it to do was to demonstrate to people why they weren't getting a promotion and they weren't even close, and to explain to them how far they were, and to demonstrate the gaps they had. And that's a slightly different use case to visibility and motivation, right? This is more of a, you know, we're a startup, we hired a bunch of people, this person thinks he's senior because he's been here for 3 years, but you know, there's so much more out there and things like that. Essentially, you know, there's a sort of mid-sized Series B plus tech company in Paris who put this in place about a year ago. And I happened to be at a barbecue with a lot of their engineers a week later, and they just rolled it out and just put it in place, and everything that anyone said at this barbecue was prefaced by, yeah, but Hugo, you're only an engineer 3, so your opinion doesn't matter as much, you know, I'm a 4. And it was joking, but it essentially had weaponized this leveling thing. And I feel similarly about using words like junior and senior inside the organization, and all of this is about when you do it. Okay, and my feeling is that in startups, even so Sqreen is essentially closer to, we're post-Series A, but close to a Series B. At our stage, it's very, very tempting, right, to put this kind of thing in place because it feels like it will solve a problem, and it might, but it will probably spawn 10 others. So personally, and this is not the only opinion out there, so seek other opinions, but personally, I don't think they're a good idea. That said, what we do at Sqreen, though, is a looser version of this. Okay, so we acknowledge that there are different tracks, and what we've done is intentionally made sure that the way we're paying people reflects this. So our highest paid engineer is paid higher than the engineering managers, who is our staff engineer today. We have managers who are managing people who are paid more than them. That's a tough concept in France. We're all kind of bought in. We're like, technical leadership is definitely different to management, but no way. If I'm managing that person on my team, no way they have a bigger salary than me. Like, come on, I have the smarts to manage them, therefore. So for us, we've kind of gone, rather than going big paperwork, lay everything out, we've gone, let's just go where it matters and let's demonstrate actively that you can succeed and actually succeed faster by doubling down on what you're already good at. So if you kind of look at the career path of an engineer, so you start out, you're learning everything, okay, you're getting into the workplace, you're seeing how all of this works, because no company is an island, and you're not one engineer building something, at least not, I think, to this audience. So you have to figure out all the other stuff than just working on your piece. And then I think you start to get better at that, and you go deeper, and then you kind of come to a stage where you're like, well, what's the next step? I need to learn new skills. Okay, so maybe I need to go broad. Maybe I need to figure out how to interact with products. Maybe I need to develop some customer focus and understand what we're trying to do here. Or I want to be a manager, which is great, but going from being an engineer to a manager is not a promotion, right? We agree, it's a career shift. Who here thinks that you just wake up one day and you're a good manager? If so, I'm hiring, because I could use some. No, okay. Management is absolutely something that you need to learn. And I think there's another really damaging concept out there, which is soft skills. The way we call things matters, and the fact that we call soft skills as such makes it sound as if they're really easy to acquire. Or it's just your personality, okay? He's a nice guy, good soft skills, okay? Okay, maybe not exactly what we mean. The way I tend to talk about them, and it's not perfect either, but I talk about sort of transverse or cross-functional skills. Because if you look at a list of common soft skills for engineers, they're actually the hard skills of another job. Okay, so if you think about communication or negotiation, if you're a lawyer, those are hard skills. Like, those are core skill jobs. So I think we do need a bit of a shift around this. All engineers need cross-functional or transverse skills to go beyond that junior individual contributor level. Okay, so whether it's to progress in tech leadership or to move across to management, there's no way to say, hey, I don't want to work on like how I interact with humans, so I'm going to go into tech leadership. And today, we are, however, still in a system that rewards people who have great technical skills, but not great soft skills. And I think that actually sort of speaks to a little bit what's hard about the industry. I think it speaks a lot to why I'm, speaking in front of a room full of very majority male participants as well. And it's this overvaluing of IQ versus EQ. And if you're building products, it matters that you can put yourself in the place of your user. It matters that you're not going to build something to solve a problem you have that you've not gone out and validated, and it matters how you interact with other people and how you get things done. It is so much easier to get things done when communication is fluid, okay, as opposed to something where everyone's in their corner. Who here is familiar with the term EQ? Yeah, okay. EQ, emotional intelligence, often cited as the counterpart to IQ. EQ has sort of 5 facets, essentially. So the first one is self-awareness. They are ordered. So if you don't know yourself, it's extremely hard to go to the next stage, okay? And I find that a lot of people don't really know themselves. We're not encouraged to spend a lot of time getting to know ourselves. In engineering in particular, it's not something that's valued. We're not like, wow, I think that's awesome that you declined all afternoon meetings because you know that generally you're grumpy after lunch. Like, you know, we don't tend to kind of be like, wow, that's a thumbs up. We say, you know, act like a machine, do it anyway. So self-awareness for engineers, that's the #1 advice that I give to my engineering managers and who are looking to develop their team. I say if your team doesn't have self-awareness, they're going to hit roadblocks in their career at every step, okay? And once you know yourself, so self-awareness then translates down into what we call self-regulation, okay? So I might know that every time I have a meeting with that particular person, I walk out of it and I'm pretty mad. So anyone who I cross right after that is probably not going to get the, you know, calm, considered Alison advice. They're going to get the what I really think, which can be a little bit direct. So knowing that I should always schedule a buffer of 15 minutes, or knowing that I get angry with this person, see it happen, and choose not to do it. So for engineers, developing self-awareness, self-regulation that leads to things like empathy, better social skills, motivation, and the ability to motivate other people. I think it's, if I can swear in this environment, I think it's bullshit that engineers don't need EQ or soft skills. And I think the industry for a very long time has kept playing, you know, along this myth of as long as you're great at it, technically the rest doesn't matter. And I think that's going to be key to like affecting real change and to building companies that are not only, you know, make a lot of money, but are also great places to work from an engineering point of view. And the #1 advice I'd say, you know, is develop leadership in your team and not management. You become a manager with a title change on LinkedIn. Like, it's as easy as that. You become a leader by essentially earning it and by demonstrating it. And that's the advice that I tend to give to young engineers, which is look for opportunities for leadership. Look for, I'm going to do this thing before it's asked of me. Which again, Anglo-Saxons, that's just how we roll. For French people, it can be, hold on, I will wait to have the title and the permission and then I'll do the thing. And I think that's okay, but I don't think that's an idea that serves you. And particularly as the Paris startup ecosystem gets more and more international, and what we end up doing is looking overseas and elsewhere to hire engineers who've understood this piece. And I think it's a little bit of pity that some of those, you know, reinforced ideas that maybe don't suit us anymore in France, you know, sort of lead to this. We were talking a little bit earlier about Tech Rocks. I don't know if any of you were at Tech Rocks. I gave a talk. The only reason I include this slide is that often I get asked about how to avoid messing up as the company gets bigger. So if you're interested in talking about any of that afterwards, please come and see me. There's also a blog post on it. And if you're a fan of reading my opinions, you can find more of them here. I have lots of them. And I'd like to ask if you have any questions. Yeah.
Just before that, I'll give you the mic because we need to register that. So it's a mic that you can even throw to the next person, okay?
All right.
You catch
ready?
it? You ready?
Yeah. So could you please show again the slide about the 8 points of how to make your employees stay in the
Absolutely. I can go back to that slide. There's a reason I go quickly through it. Yes. Any particular questions on this, or you just wanted to read it a little bit more?
Yeah. Why about the fourth points? Don't promote your best expert into management roles. Why?
Yeah. Okay. Really good question. Imagine, so companies, in order to succeed, need a bunch of different roles, right? And if you have your best doer who's excellent at producing the work, who now, instead of getting things done through code, for example, or through architecting, now has to get things done through people that chances are they've not been trained for, because we don't really kind of say, hey, you're going to be a manager in this startup, we're going to put you on a 6-month training course before it happens. We're like, hey, you're a manager, well done, go figure it out. So what happens is we essentially take away from the business the value that they brought. We put them in a position where for 6 months to a year, they're not going to be bringing huge value. And so the company essentially suffers. The person, unless this is an objective choice they've made and we've worked towards, generally is frustrated too, because they're not succeeding out of the gate. So they've gone from being like successful engineer, yeah, I'm killing it here, oh, manager, oh, this is hard, oh, this is new, oh, I'm not any good, and I'm not getting to do the fun things that my team are doing. And so it generally speaking, again, these are general rules. I often ask the room, I say, can your first engineer become your VP of engineering or your leader? The answer is resoundingly, it depends, but not as a rule. And generally speaking, they're different skill sets. I'm all for motion between career paths. If any of you have seen my LinkedIn, or I encourage you, it's quite the journey to check out my LinkedIn. I've had something like 14 jobs, and I'm 31 years old, so like I've changed a lot, so I believe a lot in mobility. I just think you've got to set people up for success. And if we talk early stage startups, usually your business is pretty fragile. And if you probably can't afford to have your best engineer short-term doing a bad job as a manager.
Okay, but in the case of a CTO, for example, a CTO is supposed to be an expert in what he's doing. But does it mean that he should continue to code, when you are growing, a CTO is supposed to manage other developers? So I thought it would be the same for the best expert like.
Yeah, so probably 2 points there. One, should a CTO code? Sacha Moa from Le Monde has an exceptional talk that I'm pretty sure has been recorded and should be online, if not via the family somewhere else, and he's much better placed to answer that part, should a CTO still code? The second piece would be CTO versus VP of engineering. So there's a lot of, like, not every company does it the same. At Sqreen, essentially, our CTO manages very few people. He manages like a core security team, there's 2 of them. And otherwise, he does deep technical and broad technical work, and our director of engineering manages everyone. So we make that distinction. And then the third piece, which would be let's say if I take Side, Hugo's company, as an example. So Side has is a 2-sided marketplace, and it has a platform that's for companies. It's a web platform. It has an iOS app. It has an Android app. The chances that Hugo has deep expertise in all of those things would be pretty rare, right? Given he is not in his twilight years, it would have taken him a while probably to accumulate all of that expertise. So you can manage, like you can know enough to manage people into tie break. And I'm actually of the opinion that for the engineering manager level, for example, not the CTO, but an engineering manager could come and probably should come from other parts of the business. And at Sqreen, that's a hypothesis we're trying. So moving people into engineering management who the only thing they're missing is they haven't coded, so they're going to learn to code, but they've got all the other skills. Who has the next question?
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Pierre. I'm the CTO of Covery, and previously I was working at Criteo for around 5 years. And there is a kind of leveling matrix, so the thing you were talking just about. I never, honestly, had the situation where, for example, low level didn't have the chance to talk where there were discussion. I personally never seen that, but I could easily understand that in some company could happen. Don't you think it's just a problematic of culture and how the company at the beginning, when they are hiring and onboarding people, explain it to everyone, in fact, and so basically a problem of culture?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and Criteo is a good and interesting example, I think. If I had, and no judgment here, but if I had to explain the culture of Sqreen, I'd say take Criteo, and it's probably the opposite. So for sure, I think there's a cultural element that comes in there. I think as well, and I would tend to say, and I don't know exactly when the tipping point is, I would tend to say it starts to get helpful to have these types of matrices after a certain point. The point, however, is a point I'm hoping we don't reach, if I can explain, which is we want at each stage people to join because they can move outside of their lane, right? And they can see something over there and spot something. And at Sqreen, we want people to be like, hey, I saw something in another department that doesn't concern me at all, but I'm going to go and help and I want to be there. And I think sometimes having so when you build a game, if there's rules of the game, you can game it, right? So if you're saying to people, these are the things you need to do to go next level, what are you going to do? You're going to do those things, and anything that's not within there, that's probably going to be secondary. And unless you're certain that you can quantify and fit into a really nice matrix the things that are both right for your business and perfect for that organization, what I tend to find is it focuses people on the wrong things. It's also why I don't believe in variable salary for anyone except for sales. And today that's because our sales team's in the US and they operate on a very classic, your OTE is your 5 times quota. So engineers at Sqreen, nobody at Sqreen has a variable salary because we think it puts you into the situation where you have to assign somewhat arbitrarily a focus that then actually provokes the wrong behavior. So I wouldn't say they're never good. I think early on they create a lot of distraction, a lot of frustration. Essentially, if people are talking about salary in your company, that's a problem. So if an engineer thinks about their salary or about their leveling and associated for even 10 minutes a day, that's toxic. So at Sqreen, our measure is that people don't think about their salary very often. And that's kind of our approach. It's very loose, right? That's not a solid metric, but it's to say, yeah, I don't often think about my salary or where I'm at because I feel like it's fair. And I think if we were to put in place a leveling matrix, and I see it in a lot of early stage startups, it feels beautiful. We get a bit carried away with the beauty of it. But you're right. I think in a certain culture, and to the point, some other cultures where I've worked, I think it would suit better. Yeah, but you pick your problems, right? If you don't do it, you have a set of problems A, and if you do it, you have a set of problems B. Yeah. Very upbeat advice, isn't it? Just pick your problems, yeah.
Hi, I'm Axel, City of Uptime. I have a follow-up question. You talked about a sort of alternative to the salary grid. Could you elaborate a bit more about how you can give visibility to your employees and still not put them in boxes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think history and context matters as well. So at Sqreen, essentially, we were a seed stage startup. We hired whoever we could. We hired a great team, but there's a mixture of that. There's a whole lot of luck, I think, about who you meet and when you meet them, because when you're a seed stage startup, you don't have a lot of money, right? So you are limited by definition and seniority. You're limited by who you can attract and things like that. We have a few aces up our sleeve and that the product's pretty interesting for developers and things like that. But the chances, so essentially when I came on board just after our Series A, you had a lot of people who were perfect for stage, which was they were doers, they were generalists, and they were essentially somewhere between 2 and 5, 6 years of experience. And that was the demographic. And so then it was, okay, well, we're going to start hiring people both above and below that in terms of experience. For us, what mattered was we clearly had no one in the team who could be an engineering manager. Why? A, they'd never done it before, okay, but B, they'd never seen it done. So for most people, Sqreen was the biggest company they'd worked at, and we were 12 people. Like that's not a lot. So, and I think if you've never seen a principal engineer in action, it's very hard for you to imagine what that role might look like. So our approach was we need role models. So our first step was to make external hires for all of those key paths. So externally hire a technical lead, externally hire our first engineering manager. Our principal engineer was promoted from within, but even for him, it was a very tough struggle. He was clearly our principal engineer. It's him, but he'd never met another principal engineer. And so for us, it was, let's go and find a principal engineer from Red Hat, someone from Datadog, someone over here to come have lunch with him, with the team, to be like, hey, actually, my role is both deep and broad. And maybe for one quarter, I work on something business critical for the company, and then the next quarter, I'm there bouncing in all the different projects. So for us, it was role models. I think that's true everywhere. You can't be what you can't see. So get them role models, and then internally have a lot of really good one-to-one discussions. We find it scales because we have essentially one manager, one engineering manager for 8 people max. They have HR business partners, so they have someone who's meeting with them every week. So they can pretty easily in their team know, it's easy enough to know what 8 people want and where 8 people's careers are going. And so if you have it down at that scale, and then how do we ensure consistency? That's through my team, which would be like, hey, you've got a really optimistic manager over here who thinks that Thibaut's ready to do this, but I don't think Thibaut's ready. So we make sure that that's how it's done equally. And then afterwards, we're pretty transparent. So we don't have to clarify, we don't have an open salary grid, but if tomorrow I accidentally hit print on PayFit and it came out, that's fine. Like we could defend every decision. And that's what the team knows. We say, we think it's unhelpful for them today to know exactly what everyone else is earning. Even as HR, I know what everyone earns, and I have to say some days it's unhelpful to have that knowledge. You know, somebody pisses you off and you're like, with that salary? Really? You're gonna pick this fight? You're gonna mess that up? Like, it's unhelpful, and I've been doing this for a while. So yeah, that's more the arbitration that we did. And if the team were like, and we also have a culture of really like speaking up and asking questions. And I hate the word transparency because as soon as you say you're a transparent company, probably you've got something to hide, right? But we have you can ask me anything culture. We share our board of director slides with the team openly, so things like this. Again, not perfect, but it's what's working for us. I was gonna say, I feel like I'm hitting the time limit well and truly, yeah. No pressure, the last question's always the make or break. I'm just kidding. Awesome, brave soul.
Hi, well, thank you very much for the talk. I'm really grateful that you can share this opinion of the managing culture in France, and I do share it as well a lot. So I wanted to know, how did you manage to do in Sqreen to erase this kind of mentality you got with French engineers, and how you overcome this kind of issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's like a 2-step plan, and it's gone beyond Sqreen. I've been at events like these trying to educate the French ecosystem for about 8 years that management actually is a punishment that you've all been given, not a reward, but that's more on that later. I think 2 things. I think one, being really, really open about how hard the job is, and the fact that it's fine if that's the skills you want to develop, but it's a different kettle of fish than what you've been doing. We ask a pretty simple question. We say, do you like solving problems with code or with people? And when people are like, maybe I'd like to be a manager, but I'm not sure, we'll say, okay, awesome. You know, you need to, let's do it for a sprint or 2 sprints. You need to get this done, but you're not allowed to write a line of code. You're also not allowed to redo anyone's code. Like, okay, this is it. You essentially, you know, and we let people figure it out. So I think because of the context where everyone wants to be a manager, you have to do a bit of management bashing. You have to be like, this is not the dream you think it is. And so we have an internal dashboard, like one of the things that I have on mine is like the number of crises that we averted this week, like number of fires we put out relating to people, and it's a bit of a running joke in the team, but if I put out 65 people-related fires this week, doesn't necessarily make people want to be like, yeah, that sounds like an awesome job, how do I get involved? So we do that because of context, right? If I was elsewhere, and nobody wanted to be a manager, and we like needed to like coax some people into, come on, you'd be great at it, like we'd take a different approach. It's just contextual. And the second thing is more than half of our engineering team isn't French. And half of our leadership team isn't either. Actually, only 3 out of 7 of our leadership team are French. So it helps, I think, that we've got all this influence. And if you hear it enough times, and I think, you know, I think it's because people believe it, right? And what I'll say to people, to engineers, I would be like, what if you could just like do the things you love all day, every day, and continue to be paid really well for it, and get to do more and more interesting things? Like it's a reasonably compelling argument, but you have to make it true, right? You can't be like, no, you just stay over here in the engineering technical track because no way we're letting you loose on a bunch of people. Like that doesn't work. They still need the people skills. They still need the EQ. But I do think it's the best scam, and that we're like, I'm actually a little bit mad at myself. Like I've spent a lot of my career managing to avoid having direct reports, and I currently have a team of 4. And whilst I like them, so like don't get me wrong, they're a great team. Also, I kind of feel like, you know, I've gamed myself out of this system. Like I've been preaching this for a while, and here we are. So, yeah. Well, thanks everyone.